He looked like a ghost conjured from the rain. Cloaked in a water-darkened duster, Royce Barrett reined in his exhausted horse before the sagging porch of a weather-beaten boarding house. Thunder rolled low and mean across the valley, echoing off distant ridges like warning drums. Wind whipped the crooked sign above the porch, Magnolia's Rest, the name barely legible through years of wear. From behind the yellow glow of lace-draped windows, two women stood watching. One older, one young, both still as stone when he arrived, though the glint in the older woman's eyes suggested they'd been expecting someone for quite some time. Maybe not him specifically, but someone desperate enough to knock in weather like this. Royce dismounted with the groan of a man whose muscles had turned to lead. 3 days riding through cold mud in harder silence had hollowed him out. His boots sank deep into the sludge as he stepped toward the house, every limb aching for warmth and stillness. A bed, a meal. That was all he needed tonight. He thought briefly of the job waiting for him up in Copper Ridge, breaking horses for a rancher who didn't ask questions. The pay was modest but clean, and with winter creeping in, any honest work was a lifeline. He'd made it this far with the coins stitched into his saddlebag lining. If this place offered shelter, he'd pay whatever they asked. Before he could lift a hand to knock, the door swung inward. A woman in her 40s stood in the frame, dark hair pinned into a tidy bun, her plain blue dress faded from years of washing. Her eyes were sharp, but her smile was practiced. "Well now," she said, voice rich like old whiskey, "aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Royce hesitated. There was something about her welcome that didn't sit right, like a preacher smiling just a bit too wide before asking for your sins. "I'm Maggie," she said, stepping aside. "Come in out of that storm before you catch your death." He crossed the threshold, dripping rain onto the polished wood floor. The parlor was small and tidy, warmed by a fire flickering in the hearth. A young woman sat nearby, blonde hair pulled back in a loose braid, her hands busy with embroidery. She looked up at him, startled, nervous, and then dropped her gaze as if burned. "This here's Bertie," Maggie said, gesturing toward the girl. "She helps me run the place." Royce gave a polite nod, removing his hat. "Name's Royce Barrett. Appreciate the kindness, ma'am. I can pay for the room and supper." Bertie's hands fumbled the needle, sending her threads spiraling to the floor. She bent quickly, hiding her face. Maggie's eyes flicked toward the back of the house, just for a moment, but enough for Royce to notice. The woman's smile stayed in place, but the warmth never reached her eyes. "We don't see many travelers out this way, not this time of year," she said. "You're lucky we still had a room made up." Royce stepped toward the fire, letting the heat begin its slow thaw. He'd spent enough time on the trail to know when something was off. The air in the house was clean, sure, but it held a strange tension, like a violin string pulled too tight. But he was tired, too tired to question hospitality in the middle of a storm. "A meal would be mighty welcome," he said, unfastening the top buttons of his coat. Bertie rose without a word, disappearing toward what he assumed was the kitchen. Maggie motioned him toward a small wooden table near the fire. As he sat, the older woman brought him a steaming bowl of stew, the scent of beef and carrots filling the room. But beneath it, Royce caught something bitter, unfamiliar. "You look like you've been riding hard," Maggie said. "Where you headed?" "Copper Ridge," he replied, voice rough. "Work lined up, breaking stock." She watched him closely as he raised the spoon. The first bite was too salty. He swallowed it anyway. A man didn't get picky during a storm. Across the room, Bertie had returned to her sewing, but her hands trembled and her fingers worked slower now. Royce watched her prick herself with the needle. Once, then again. She winced but said nothing. "Careful," Maggie snapped. "We don't need blood on Mrs. Henderson's tablecloth." Bertie flinched at the name. Royce noticed. Outside, the wind howled louder. The storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. "You ladies are generous, letting a stranger in like this," he said between bites. "Oh, we believe in hospitality," Maggie replied. Her voice had the smooth edge of practiced charm. "It gets awful quiet here with just the two of us. Nice to have company for once." She moved to the window, gazing into the blackness beyond the glass. There was a long silence. The fire crackled. The stew sat heavy in his gut. Too heavy. His vision swam slightly. He blinked hard, trying to shake the sudden fog from his head. "Room's upstairs," Maggie said smoothly. "Second door on the right. Clean sheets. You'll sleep like the dead." Bertie stiffened. Her needle slipped again. Royce stood, but his legs felt off, as though the ground itself tilted beneath him. He placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. His skin had begun to prickle. Something wasn't right, and as he stepped toward the staircase, fighting the wave of dizziness rising inside him, the sense of wrongness settled into something more than a hunch. It wrapped around his chest like a noose. Royce climbed the narrow staircase like a man twice his age, each step groaning beneath his weight. His boots felt heavier than they should, and the railing was the only thing keeping him upright. The house had grown quieter, too quiet, but from below he could still make out the soft clinking of dishes, the rustle of skirts, and something else. Whispering. Urgent. Low. When he reached the landing, the hallway stretched before him in shadow and silence. The second door on the right stood ajar, a golden sliver of lamplight bleeding onto the floorboards. It looked too neat, like a room prepared for guests who never arrived. He pushed the door open fully. The space inside was small, just a bed, a washstand, a single window that rattled with each gust of wind. Everything was immaculate. The bed made tight, the basin gleaming, the air scrubbed clean of dust or time. For a place that rarely saw visitors, it looked suspiciously fresh. Royce eased himself onto the edge of the bed. His saddlebag slid from his shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. He pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to steady the spinning world. He'd been drugged before, once in Colorado by men who wanted his badge in the bounty he carried. This felt too familiar. Numb limbs, clouded thoughts, nausea that rolled in waves. Whatever Maggie had put in that stew, it was working fast. But they had miscalculated. Royce had built up a resistance over the years. Little tricks and tinctures picked up from field medics and fellow marshals. He'd ingested enough over time to dull the effects. Barely. It gave him minutes. Maybe less. But it was more than they'd planned for. He forced himself upright, stumbling toward the washstand. Cold water slapped his face, helping him focus. That's when he saw it. A flicker of light caught something beneath the bed. He knelt, muscles stiff, balance shaky. His fingers closed around cold metal. A knife, but not just any blade. Bone-handled, carved with a distinct pattern he'd seen 3 weeks earlier in Silver Creek. It belonged to a cattle buyer named Morrison, a man who never reached his destination. A sick weight dropped into Royce's gut. He reached farther beneath the bed and pulled out a silver pocket watch, a fine pair of leather gloves, a coin pouch still holding gold. Not lost items, not forgotten. Trophies. Proof. This place was a spider's web, and he was the next fly. The whispering downstairs stopped, replaced by footsteps. Not the soft tread of Maggie or Bertie, but heavy boots, multiple pairs, approaching the porch. Royce's blood turned cold. This wasn't a simple scam. It was a machine. Maggie lured them in, drugged them, and others finished the job. He staggered to his saddlebag, hands fumbling at a hidden seam in the leather lining. He ripped it open and pulled out the object he'd kept hidden since leaving Tucson. A badge. Tarnished, scarred, but unmistakable. United States Marshal. This had been no accidental stop. Royce had been hunting them for months. The missing travelers, the merchant from Tucson, the rumors of a safe house that was anything but safe. It all led here, to Magnolia's Rest, and he had just walked into the heart of it. Footsteps pounded on the porch below. Voices, men's voices, muffled by the storm. One of them gruff and low, the other younger, more agitated. "He's a big one," said the older man. "Gonna be more trouble than the last." Royce dropped to his knees, pressing an ear to the warped floorboards. The wood carried their voices clear as glass. "Found near 200 in his saddlebag," Maggie said. Her tone was no longer warm. It was cold, businesslike. "Plus whatever he's got on him," another added. "Not bad for a night's haul." The young man spoke next. "What about the girl? She's jumpy again. Nearly stuck herself twice." "She knows what happens if she talks," Maggie snapped. "She learned her lesson with the merchant." Royce's breath caught. The girl, Bertie. He thought back to her nervousness, the way she jumped when Maggie raised her voice, the blood on her finger, the look she cast toward the back door, the desperation behind her silence. She wasn't just scared. She was trapped. The pieces clicked into place. Bertie wasn't part of the con. She was a prisoner, coerced into this charade. Maggie had something on her. Someone, maybe. A sister, a threat, a promise. Whatever it was, it had kept her silent. For now. Upstairs, Royce moved like a man half-conscious, every step a fight. His hand gripped the revolver at his side. He checked the chamber. 5 shots. That would have to be enough. The staircase groaned beneath the weight of men climbing. "She said he'd be out by now," came the gruff voice. "She ain't wrong often," said another. Royce crouched behind the door, every nerve alight with fury and instinct. His vision blurred, and the room swayed, but he held fast. The doorknob began to turn. The men weren't expecting a fight, but they were going to get one. The door creaked open. A large man stepped through, lantern in one hand, a coil of rope in the other. His eyes took only a second to scan the room, and in that second, Royce struck. He brought his revolver down like a hammer, slamming it against the man's skull. The man collapsed instantly, his body crashing into the floorboards. The lantern dropped with him, smashing open, spilling oil in a shimmering arc across the wooden floor. A heartbeat later, the flame caught. Fire surged to life like it had been waiting. Royce staggered backward as heat swept up the curtains and danced along the walls. Another man shouted from the hallway, and the narrow staircase exploded with boots and voices. Confusion, panic, orders. "The hell happened up there? Get him before he burns the whole place down." Smoke curled thick and fast. The old house was dry timber and kerosene, and now the trap they'd built was turning on its makers. Royce coughed, retreating from the spreading flames. His legs buckled. He caught himself against the wall, blinking through the rising heat. He had seconds, maybe less. The window. He crawled toward it, choking on smoke, the heat blistering against his skin. The latch was hot to the touch, his fingers clumsy and thick from the drug. But after a painful struggle, it clicked open. Rain poured in, the storm still howling outside. Below, he could see the porch roof. A drop, 12 feet, maybe more. Then mud and shadows. Men were already below. "He's at the window," a voice cried. Bertie's. But she wasn't calling out like a captor trying to stop an escape. There was pain in her voice. Panic. "Don't let him get away." Then something else. A sob. "Please," she called through the rain. "I never wanted this. They made me. They have my sister." The words sliced through Royce like a blade. Bertie wasn't just afraid. She was owned. That look in her eyes, the trembling hands, the sharp warning Maggie had delivered when she pricked her finger. It wasn't discipline. It was control. He looked back into the burning room one last time. Smoke devoured the ceiling. Fire licked the bedpost and raced toward the door, turning walls into tinder. Royce didn't hesitate. He launched himself through the window. The fall knocked the air from his lungs. His shoulder hit first, then ribs, then legs, landing in the mud with a sickening crunch. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't move, but the rain and shock jolted his senses. The drug's grip began to fade as adrenaline took its place. He rolled to cover behind a rain barrel just as a gunshot tore through the air. Wood splintered inches from his head. They'd seen him. He returned fire, the shot going wide. His aim was poor, but it startled the shooter long enough to buy him a few heartbeats. Voices shouted over the roar of the fire and storm. "Flank him! He's bleeding! He can't be far!" Royce crawled through the mud, every inch a test of will. The boarding house blazed behind him, orange light glowing like hell against the rain-washed night. He could hear Maggie now, screaming orders, desperate to salvage what remained of her operation. "Stop fighting me, you little fool!" she yelled. Royce crawled to the corner of the house and peeked around. He saw her. Maggie was dragging Bertie through the mud toward the horses behind the storage shed. The girl was resisting now, thrashing and clawing, nails digging into Maggie's face. Blood streaked both women, some from the firelight, some from the needle pricks, some from rage. Royce lifted his revolver and stepped into the open. Federal Marshal, he called out, his voice cutting through the storm. Let her go. Maggie froze, then turned. Her eyes were wild, hair soaked, face twisted with fury. And behind that fury, fear. You're too late, she spat. You don't know what you've walked into. I know enough, Royce said. Now step back. That girl's coming with me. Bertie was shaking but didn't run. She stood rooted in the mud, tears streaking her soot-smeared cheeks. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. Royce. Her hand moved slowly toward her dress, and from within, she pulled something metal, a badge, the same shape and shine as the one Royce carried. I'm Ruth Caldwell, she said, Deputy Marshal, undercover for 2 months. Royce blinked, stunned. Bertie, Ruth wasn't a victim. She was one of them. His mind raced backward, reassembling every nervous glance, every flinch, every moment of doubt. It hadn't been fear, it had been performance. Carefully rehearsed, perfectly timed. You played the part, he said hoarsely. To bring it down, Ruth replied. This place, Maggie, the whole network. A shot rang out from behind them. Royce dropped into a crouch, returning fire instinctively. A man fell, gurgling in the mud. Ruth didn't flinch. Her own pistol snapped up, firing once, then twice, both shots hitting their marks. The men behind the storage shed crumpled. The trap that had swallowed so many had just been torn open from within. Maggie, wounded now, stumbled back. Her eyes locked with Ruth's in disbelief. You! She hissed. You lying little... Ruth stepped forward, gun raised. You taught me how to lie. Rain poured down in sheets, but the fire showed no sign of dying. Magnolia's rest was fully ablaze now, an inferno tearing through every floorboard, rafter, and memory the house had ever held. Flames danced through shattered windows and climbed into the night sky like spirits released from their prison. Royce stood over Maggie, revolver trained on her chest. Her dress was torn, blood seeping from a gash above her brow. The fury in her eyes had been replaced by something colder. Resignation. You don't know what you've done, she said through gritted teeth. No, Ruth Caldwell replied as she stepped into the flickering firelight beside Royce. You don't know what you've lost. Behind them, the horses pawed nervously at the wet ground, tired and restless. The storm kept most of the fire at bay, but it was spreading fast, fueled by old timber and the sins of too many forgotten travelers. Royce turned to Ruth. Your sister? I don't have one, she said softly. That was part of the cover. He studied her in the firelight, no longer the trembling girl with needle and thread, but a law officer hardened by months of living under Maggie's thumb. Every flinch, every stumble, every drop of blood had been calculated. You fooled me, he said. I had to fool everyone. A scream echoed from the other side of the house. A man engulfed in flame, his cry silenced as the structure gave way with a thunderous crack. The second floor collapsed inward, sparks shooting into the rain-soaked night. This operation, Ruth continued, not turning to watch the flames, has been bleeding the territory for over a year. Dozens gone missing, robbed, poisoned, disappeared. And you just lived in it? Royce asked. I cataloged everything, she said, eyes locked on Maggie. Who came through? What disappeared with them? The names they used? Where the goods ended up? I needed hard proof, and someone on the outside to make it stick. Royce nodded. That's why I was allowed in. You weren't supposed to get as far as you did, Ruth added quietly. They thought you'd be unconscious before you ever reached the stairs. Maggie let out a bitter laugh. You think this ends with me? You think burning my house stops anything? Royce stepped closer. You're done, Maggie. You'll stand trial. And when we drag your ledger out from the ashes, a dozen more names will go down with you. And how many more will rise in their place? She hissed. Ruth didn't answer. Instead, she moved to the pack horse tied near the shed. One by one, she began pulling out saddlebags, opening them to reveal the evidence. Money, jewelry, watches, papers, wedding rings, family keepsakes, names etched on the inside of lockets, initials burned into leather belts, memories stolen, lives erased. Royce felt a sickness crawl into his chest. These were real people, he said. Not just notches in a ledger. Ruth held up a gold locket. This one belonged to a woman from El Paso. She was traveling alone to reunite with her son. Her body was found half buried in a ravine 6 miles from here. Maggie turned her face away. Behind them, the fire consumed the last of the staircase, roaring through the bones of the boarding house. Rain hissed against the flames, but couldn't kill them. Not yet. Sirens weren't coming. No help would arrive. It was just the 3 of them now, and the ghosts that clung to this place. "We've got enough to bring down half the ring," Ruth said, as she strapped the bags to a fresh mount. "With Maggie alive, we can trace the rest." "Then we ride at first light," Royce replied. "Together." She looked at him. "You trust me now?" "I do," he said, "but that doesn't mean I'm done asking questions." A faint smile touched her lips. "Fair enough." Maggie said nothing more. Her defiance had wilted. She sat in the mud, arms bound, staring into the blaze that had once been her kingdom. The storm began to drift east. The wind softened. Dawn hinted at the edges of the horizon, coloring the rain clouds with a dull pink glow. They left Magnolia's rest behind them. Nothing but ash and smoke now. The fire would burn itself out by midday, and nothing would be left but scorched earth and memories. But some truths would survive. Ruth rode slightly ahead, scanning the road like she'd never stopped hunting. Royce followed beside her, Maggie tied to the last horse. The weight of her crimes dragged behind them like a broken cart. They carried justice in their saddlebags and fire in their blood. By the time the sun broke over the distant hills, Magnolia's Rest was a smoldering skeleton on the prairie. Black smoke curled into the morning sky, marking the land like a scar. The road ahead was soft with rain and shadow, but Royce and Ruth didn't speak as they rode. Not yet. Some things were too heavy for conversation. Some silences deserved to breathe. Behind them, Maggie sat slumped on horseback, wrists bound to the saddle horn. She didn't plead. She didn't curse. Whatever fire she'd carried inside had burned out with the walls of her house. Royce glanced at Ruth. The transformation still caught him off guard. Gone was the anxious young woman fumbling with her embroidery. In her place rode a deputy marshal who'd survived 2 months inside a den of wolves and never once broke cover. "You all right?" he asked finally. Ruth didn't answer immediately. "I will be," she said at last. "Once the others pay." Royce nodded. "You think she'll talk?" "She has to," Ruth said. "We've got her ledger, names, locations, payments. But there are bigger fish upstream. She was a midwife in a larger crime. We need the ones who hired her, protected her." He looked ahead, jaw tight. "She's not the first I've seen play innocent until the hangman's noose starts swinging." They rode until the sun rose fully, painting the wet hills in gold. A hawk circled overhead. The world looked clean again, but it wasn't. Not underneath. They stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley road. Royce dismounted first, stretching aching limbs. Ruth followed suit, dusting mud from her trousers. Maggie remained on the horse, staring into the distance. "Funny," she murmured. "I built that house to escape men, to make something of my own." Royce turned to her slowly. "So you lured women in too?" "I took in who I had to," she said, eyes distant. "Bertie was supposed to be the same. Quiet, obedient, grateful." "I was never yours," Ruth said, stepping closer. "And the people you drugged weren't yours to take." "No," Maggie said bitterly. "But they didn't belong to anyone else either, did they?" Royce stepped between them, voice low. "Save it for the trial." They remounted and continued toward the nearest town, Whetstone, a 2-day ride through foothills and forest. The storm had softened the trail, making travel slow. But neither Royce nor Ruth was in a hurry. Not with Maggie in tow, not with every mile offering a chance for reflection. That night they made camp in a dry stretch of pine near the river bend. The fire was modest. Quiet crackling filled the silence as the moon climbed over the trees. Ruth sat on a log, whittling a stick with slow, precise movements. Her badge gleamed faintly in the firelight, pinned now to her vest. She looked every inch the law officer. But Royce had seen the toll, in the quiet, in the way her shoulders curled inward when she thought no one was watching. "You're not sleeping," he said. "Neither are you." "I've seen things," he admitted. "Ugly things." But that place, what she built, it's not over, Ruth said without looking up. There are more just like it. Different names, different doors. Royce stared into the fire. What made you do it? Go under like that? Ruth hesitated. My brother, she said, traveled west last year. Never made it to his claim. No one ever found his body. But I traced his route. He passed through this county. Royce's throat tightened. You think Maggie? I found his knife in her storage trunk, Ruth said softly, wrapped in a blanket, like it was nothing. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. They sat in silence a while longer before Ruth finally set down her whittling. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. If you've ever lost someone to silence, you learn to live loud enough for two. Royce nodded. I used to think justice meant the law, he said, but sometimes it just means not letting people vanish. Behind them, Maggie stirred in her sleep, bound to the base of a tree. A snore escaped her cracked lips. Ruth didn't even glance back. Do you think she regrets it? She asked. No, Royce said. I think she regrets losing. Ruth tossed another log on the fire, and the flames flared, casting long shadows across the campsite. The evidence they'd collected sat bundled near Royce's saddle. Gold coins, watches, ledgers, even a photograph of a family never named, found folded in a blood-stained coat pocket. Tomorrow they'd deliver it all, but tonight they remembered the silence and let it burn. They reached Whetstone by mid-afternoon the next day. The town sat quiet under a slate-gray sky, its main street slick with last night's rain. Locals looked up as the trio rode in. Royce and Ruth at the front, Maggie behind, hands still bound, mud crusted on her boots and bitterness in her stare. They tethered the horses outside the sheriff's office, where a deputy rushed forward at the sight of the badge on Ruth's vest. Inside, behind locked bars, Maggie finally spoke again. I kept that place alive, she said, voice low, bitter. I fed men who would have let me starve in the old days. I made my own kind of justice. Royce stepped closer to the cell, the light from the window catching the wear on his face. You made a graveyard, he said, and called it a home. Ruth handed over the ledgers, marked with names, dates, and payouts. The stolen belongings were cataloged, laid out on a deputy's desk, and prepared for transport east to a federal circuit court. Maggie Caldwell's trial would stretch across 3 counties. Later that evening, Royce stood outside the boarding house they'd rented for the night. Rain had started again, soft and steady. Ruth joined him on the porch, arms folded. Do you think we made a difference? She asked. Royce watched the road disappear into the dusk. We buried a place that swallowed the innocent, he said. That's a start. She nodded. There's more out there. Other houses, other names. I know, Royce said, but now they'll know someone's coming for them. They stood in silence watching the rain fall, and as night settled over Whetstone, 2 federal marshals rested, just long enough to ride again, because some roads weren't meant to end.